This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzanotes, and today is Saturday, and that means it's time for Nizzanotes, my weekly vlog series where I talk about limited Magic. We're still talking about the Brothers War, the most recent limited format, and in this video I'm going to give you a list of 10 cards that you need to stop playing in this format. All 10 of these cards are cards where 99% of the time when you play them, they're going to do more bad than good for you. When talking about each of these cards, I'm going to show you some data from 17 Lands. I've talked about 17 Lands before, but if I haven't, you can check it out. Go to 17lands.com. You can sign up for them to gather data from all of your drafts and stuff. It'll look at when you pick cards, what your win percentage is, stuff like that. And then on 17lands.com, they take all of this data and it's freely available. So, once there's a large enough sample size, we can get a pretty good idea for what cards are good and what cards are bad in a limited format. As we'll see, the data supports the idea that all 10 of these cards are cards you mostly shouldn't be playing, but there's still cards that I've seen people play or I've argued with people about in the comments or in Twitch chat or whatever, so I thought it would be a good idea to highlight these cards and talk about them because some of them really don't look that bad, but they are for various reasons in the format, and we'll talk about why in particular these cards are bad. So before we look at these 10 cards, I do want to show you a card that is sort of a baseline type card. That card is Tomacool Honor Guard. It has a win percentage of about 54.2%, and on average, it's taken around the 10th pick. Your average person on 17 Lands has a higher than normal win rate, so 54.2 is sort of the average win rate on 17 Lands. So in other words, this card is fine but unexciting. Every single card we're going to look at in this list has a significantly lower win percentage, and it's also taken more highly than the Honor Guard is, sort of proving my point that these cards are being played too much. So let's start with one of the ones that I think is the most contentious, and that is Swiftfoot Boots. This is a card that's amazing in Commander. It's amazing in the right environment and constructed too, but it's not the kind of card that works in Limited basically ever. It has a win percentage of a dismal 46.2%, and it's taken around the 5th pick, which is way, way, way too high. This is a card that has such a low win rate, you shouldn't even be playing it, but people are taking it that highly, and keep in mind, the people who are having their data tracked by 17 Lands are above average players. So your average person is probably taking these even more highly. The reason a card like this isn't good is simply because it doesn't do anything. Yes, I know in a literal sense it does something, it gives hexproof and haste to something, but those are two keywords that are almost entirely irrelevant on any creature that isn't already good. So you'd much rather spend your mana on something that actually adds to the board, something hugely important in this aggressive format, than you would to spend your mana on this and then on slightly augmenting a creature. There are a few corner cases where I can see running the boots, but you shouldn't be running it 99% of the time, as the data reflects. Another interesting data point about Swiftfoot Boots, by the way, is how bad it is when you top deck it. So there is a metric on 17 Lands that's called improvement when drawn. And this means, what this card does to your win rate when it's what you draw during the game. And with Swiftfoot Boots, your win rate drops by 6.2% when you draw it. And that goes a long way towards showing you just how bad it is on a wide variety of boards. Another pretty contentious one, because I gave it an F in my set review and people were shocked, is Painful Quandary. It has proven to be an F in the format. It has a win percentage of 48.1, and people are taking it around a 3rd pick, which, sometimes on rares and stuff, they have slightly higher pick rates because people are trying to get to the point where they get gems from drafting, which you get to do once you have every rare and mythic in the set, 4 copies of it, right? So I can kind of see it maybe going a little higher because of that, but not this much higher. This card looks like it would be pretty sweet too, and it is good in like Commander, but I have lost to this once. Even these cards that are bad, a 0.1% win rate does mean it's winning sometimes. It's not like its win percentage is 0, but 48.1 is pretty bad. And you will lose to it sometimes. If your opponent plays it in the exact right situation where you're both at parity and in top deck mode and you don't have very much life, guess what? You're going to lose when your opponent plays Painful Quandary. But at almost any other stage of the game, it doesn't matter. If your opponent plays it when they're behind, it's a complete train wreck. because you can just do whatever you want, and paying life probably doesn't matter. Maybe discarding doesn't matter, but you're given this choice. And anytime you have one of these choices, you can really pick an option that just doesn't matter very much, especially in a format where you could discard something with Unearth or discard something you know you can get back later, or where you can just pay life because you don't really care about your life total. One kind of interesting thing about Painful Quandary's metrics is that it is actually a card that has a positive improvement when drawn, just barely, 0.6%, so your win rate goes up slightly. Obviously, the win rate is still really bad, but it does sort of show you that there are these ideal situations where you can play this and it makes a real difference, but those situations aren't common enough. This is a 5-mana enchantment that almost doesn't do anything most of the time. Next, I want to talk about Thran Vigil, which has the lowest win percentage of any card we're going to talk about here at 40.8. It's taken around an 8th pick, which isn't high, but given how awful this card is, that's pretty high. Like, this should be the 15th card in the pack. It's that bad. This looked like it might be an interesting build around for the format because you have Unearth, you have other ways to get things out of your graveyard. But, in a format this aggressive, playing this and trying to grind out value with it doesn't work out. And I don't think the upside it gives you is quite enough anyway. Like, it needed to, in addition to the counter, like, also give a keyword until end of turn or something to really get it to the point where you feel like you're doing it. Because just getting a counter every time something leaves your graveyard, it's just not powerful enough for a card that, doesn't do anything until you start removing things from your graveyard in the first place. So it takes a bunch of work to make it work, and then what you get isn't good enough, and that's what's made it really bad. It lowers your win percentage by 3.5 percentage points when you draw it. So yeah, another pretty bad card. This one, at least it's not taken as highly as like Swiftfoot Boots or Painful Quandary, but 8 is really, really high for this card. It shouldn't be taken at all. Next is another card from the Retro Frame Artifacts. It's Ornithopter. So I like the Retro Frame Artifacts for a lot of reasons. I think they make this format a lot more interesting. There's lots of cards that interact well with the format, namely like all the cantrip ones, the ones that you can sack, stuff like that. Those are really sweet. That's where a lot of the fixing in the format is as well. But there's also this interesting problem created by the Retro Frame Artifacts for people who are new to Limited, and it's reflected by Swiftfoot Boots as well. And that is that people know these cards are good, let's say in Constructed, and they think that's going to carry over to Limited. And that it just doesn't work out that way. And that's true of Ornithopter. This is a card that has been played for decades at this point, showing up in affinity decks and artifact decks and Constructed, where, playing a free artifact gives you some sort of huge bonus, decreases the cost of your spells. You can equip it with stuff that, is amazing, etc. Like, there's a lot you can do with Ornithopter and Constructed. In Limited, even in a format that has this many artifact payoffs, there just isn't. So, yes, this costs 0 mana, and, I think part of the reason this card sees some play, in addition to people sort of overrating it because they think it's good and Constructed, but I think they also sort of think that, what could go wrong about playing a 0 mana artifact that gives me, I don't pay anything and I get something, right? That's a good deal. And I understand people thinking that way, but one thing to really keep in mind is that cards are resources, and by playing this card as a 0 mana 0/2 artifact, sure, you don't pay any mana, but you use up a card. Right? Your cards are important. If you're worried about flooding out late, that's basically what drawing Ornithopter feels like, except you're doing it early. It's almost like you're mulliganing. The card just doesn't do anything. In a world where you have like 6 Might Stones animations, maybe you think about running it. But you really have to have a lot line up just right for Ornithopter to be worth playing. It has this low 43.9% win rate, lowers your win percentage by 3.3% when you draw it, and it's taken around a 10th pick, which, again, this one's a little more reasonable than some on the list, but 10 is probably still too high for it. Next, I want to talk about Philology Chain Dancer. This card looks like it would be fine. I kind of thought it would be going into the format, but it isn't. It has a win percentage of 51.1%, and remember, for 17 lands, that's bad. A 50% win rate is what everybody, if you put everyone in Magic, what their win rate is, everyone, because it's a zero-sum game, all of those games are won by one side or the other 50% of the time, right? 100% of the time they're won by one side or the other, but the collective win percentage of every Magic player, if you put them all together, it's 50% because someone has to win and someone has to lose. So 51% might look okay when you have that in mind, but it's not really when you're talking about people who have their data tracked on 17 lands. It's bad. And, a 4-mana 2/4 is not good. Having to pump mana into this to give it double strike isn't really good either. You just want to be playing cheaper creatures and curving out, and they don't ask you for any sort of special additional investments like the Chain Dancer does. It's just too slow, too clunky, and that's what's led to it having a low win percentage, hurting your win percentage by 3.4 percentage points when you draw it. And it really shouldn't be taken as high as the 9th pick, where it's currently being taken. Next, I want to talk about Great Desert Prospector. So this is a card I hoped would be pretty decent in the format, but it's not really. It would have been if this format had more of a real ramp strategy that worked more consistently. You can see where this would be good because you play this on turn 5, get 3 Power Stones, slam something big the next turn. As I've talked about, like in last week's video where I talked about the archetypes, there just aren't enough good, common, and uncommon things for you to ramp into in the format that really give you serious value. And this has hurt ramp strategies a lot. So the Prospector ends up being an inefficient creature that makes Power Stones that you usually don't care about. Now, this card, is one where I have been in a deck where I actually played one, but it took a very specific deck. I had 4 of the green-white Signpost uncommon, the 1/1 that gives you a +1/+1 counter every time an artifact enters the battlefield, and I had a bunch of cards that helped me go wide, like the Scrapwork Sentry. And so, the idea of having like 2 of the Signpost in play, playing this, getting 3 Power Stones, it was a very doable thing in the deck because I had them. I had a bunch of other cards, green-whites about artifacts entering the battlefield. I had other cards that liked it too. Those were just sort of the key ones that really made it worth playing, and it definitely was in that deck. I frequently had at least 1 of the Signpost in play. I had 2 in play frequently, and then getting 3 or 4 Power Stones was basically game over for my opponent. But it took that very specific kind of deck, and maybe I shouldn't have even run it there. It was kind of like, maybe I'll run this card because I can here. It makes sense in my deck. Maybe just running, not a 5-drop in my green-white aggro deck was better. But it did work multiple times during the draft. But again, if you just are in a regular green-white deck and you have like 3 payoffs, it's not going to be enough. You need to have gone really crazy. Your deck has to be really, really good at paying you off for getting an artifact in play. And then the Prospector is worth looking at if you're also good at going wide. So there's too much going on for it to be very good for the most part. That's why it has a low win percentage of 50.6. Lowers your win percentage by 2.7% when you play it. And this one is taken around a 5th pick, which is way, way too high. Next, let's look at Veterans Power Blade. So this has a 51% win percentage, lowers your win percentage by 6.6% when you draw it during the game, and it's taken around a 9th pick. So, this one is one that I've never loved. Like early in the format, I didn't like it at all. For a little while there, as the format felt really aggressive, and it is really aggressive, I started to think it was pretty solid for soldier decks. But the more I play this format, the more like any equipment, sort of like Swiftfoot Boots, the more any equipment gets less interesting to me because you just have to be playing things that add to the board. The Power Blade can make one of your creatures better, so it adds to the board, takes some work. You can equip it to soldiers more cheaply, but it just doesn't do enough to feel like it's worth the whole card most of the time. Again, there are some situations where I can see playing this. If you end up in a deck with enough creatures with powerful keywords, creatures with First Strike or Lifelink and stuff, maybe you end up running one in like your blue-white soldier deck, right? But it's not the kind of payout for the blue-white soldier deck that you really need or want or really go after early at all. Picking it up around a 9th pick, if you've really got it going, is a decent thing to do, but most of the time you should just be passing this thing. Lowers your win percentage, by the way, by 6.6% when you draw it. And again, that number, the lower, the improvement when drawn number is only based on when you draw it during the game, not if it's in your opening hand. But that whole improvement when drawn number really shows you how good these cards are, like, as a top deck, which is to say it's awful. It just doesn't do enough. And that's the problem with it. We've also got one last equipment to talk about, and it is Thran Power Suit. I thought this would be kind of okay in the format. I thought maybe it would give you enough, but has the same problem as the other equipment. It doesn't give you enough of a boost, and obviously it's like an equipment build around in a set where I'm telling you don't play equipment, and that's a problem. That's why it has a dismal win percentage of 43.6%, and it lowers your win percentage by 6.2% when you draw it, and people are taking it around a 9th pick for some reason. There's going to be better cards in it in your pack if you're taking it at 9th. There's going to be better cards around. And then the last card I want to look at is Wasteful Harvest. This is probably, of all of these, the one I've seen people actually play the most. And, that surprises me. This is one I wasn't high on going into the format, and I'm even lower on it now in a format where got to add to the board. Like, that's key. It doesn't do it. It has a win percentage of 47.5%, lowers your win percentage by 3.6%, and it's taken as a 10th pick. But, 10th is way too high for this card because it's basically unplayable. Yes, the black-green deck is into milling itself for value and stuff, but guess what? You have creatures who actually add to the board who do that for you all over the format. You don't need to be playing a card that doesn't add to the board at all. Even in the most graveyardy deck ever, you're going to have better ways to mill yourself than casting Wasteful Harvest, which just sort of, it's like a really bad 3-mana draw one, and that is just not a very good card. Oh, there's actually one more I forgot to mention, and that is Goblin Firebomb. People see this and they're like, oh, hey, it's removal. And that it is, I guess, but it's so inefficient at doing its job that it is just bad in a format this fast. It has a win percentage of 49.4%, and it's interesting, most removal, even mediocre removal, has a pretty good improvement when drawn rate, because when you draw removal, you in the mid to late game, which is really what the improvement when drawn number mostly measures, even if it's like a 5-mana removal spell that isn't that efficient, it usually has pretty good improvement when drawn because you draw it and you kill your opponent's best thing that you can kill. Well, in the case of the Firebomb, it actually still has a negative improvement when drawn. It's better than some of the other cards on the list. It only lowers your win percentage by 0.6%, but it does sort of showcase for you how bad of removal this really is because it's so inefficient at killing things. You're not going to have the mana to actually use it that often. 7 mana is a lot. And sure, it's an artifact in a set that cares about them, blah, blah, but it's just not good enough. That's why it has a low win rate. That's why it lowers your win rate when you draw it, and it shouldn't be getting taken around a 10th pick at all. So those are 10 cards you should stop playing if you want your win percentage to go up in this format. If you want to take a deep dive of your own into 17 lands data, there's a whole bunch more of it you can find. But I thought, these are 10 cards that I'm seeing people talk about, and I'm seeing people play too much, and people should stop if they want their win rate to go up. So now that we've done that, let's do our usual crack a pack, which means show you a pack one, pick one situation, talk about the cards in the pack, and then, I'll tell you what I would first pick. All right, so here is our pack. Our retro frame artifact is Foundry Inspector. That's a good one I'm actually happy to first pick. It's a 3-mana 3/2 that reduces the cost of all your artifacts by 1. Every deck in the format is going to have a good number of artifacts. Some are going to have a ton. It's going to decrease enough cards in every deck in the format that you always play it. And it's a nice first pick for that reason, because it's not only a powerful card, it's one you can always play because it's colorless. And that's a nice thing about all of the good, retro frame artifacts out there. They're all, nice first picks because you'll play them in virtually every deck, in addition to them being powerful. So, I would be perfectly happy first picking this, and it's nice to see a card that good right away. We feel good about looking at the rest of the pack. Next up, we've got Scrapwork Rager. This has been pretty good. It has been a little less good because the format is more about curving out with aggressive creatures and attacking your opponent well, or at least trading well, and it doesn't do that. A 4-mana 2/2, it can trade with some stuff, but it's just not that great in this format. I mean, it's still a nice card. You'll run like one of them in most of your black decks, but running more than that gets a little sketchy. It's not even that good as sacrifice fodder because it's so expensive. It's fine, but I would definitely take the Inspector over it. Sentinel Stalwart is next. This has been a little better than I expected, and it's just because the format's fast. Playing out 1-drops and 2-drops is basically every 1-drop and 2-drop in the format is going to be a little better than you probably think it is because of how fast the format is. I would take Rager and Inspector over it, though. Yodi and Medic is next. This thing's pretty medium. It is a soldier. It does hold down the ground reasonably well. A lot of the soldiers fly, so sometimes you need that. But I would take all 3 cards we've seen so far before I took Yodi and Medic. Took Hacia's Onulet, another fine card. You end up running one a lot in white decks for sure. The life it can gain you is the kind of thing that can help you stabilize against more aggressive decks. At the same time, it's pretty inefficient when you cast it, and sometimes that can hurt a lot in a format where if your opponent's curving out and you play like something on turn 3 and then an Onulet on turn 5, you're probably dead. So, you need something more impactful than that if that's what you're going to do. So we're still on Foundry Inspector for sure. Stern Lesson is next. This is another card that has sort of underperformed like Scrapwork Rager because you want cards that add to the board, and this adds to the board even less effectively than the Rager. It's not unplayable. It's nice, especially in blue-black and blue-red, but I was imagining a format where this would be sort of a bread and butter common, and it's not one you want to run in a lot of decks, and even in the decks you do run it in, it doesn't feel insane. So, still on Foundry Inspector. Argothian Sprite is next. It's a 2-drop. I just mentioned all 1 and 2-drops are better than they look, and this one already looks pretty solid, so it's been nice in the format. There's lots of stuff that can't block it. It can get bigger if you get to the later stage of the game. It's nice. I don't love the idea of first picking it, but I might take it after Foundry Inspector out of what we've seen so far. Still on the Inspector for sure. It and the Rager sort of are close, I think. Loran's Escape is next. This is okay. The best tricks, as we've learned lately, because they've given us lots of good ones, the best tricks are the ones that are really excellent at helping your creature win combat. In other words, survive while killing your opponent's creature. And also tricks that can save your creature from removal. You want tricks that can do both of those things, and this isn't that good at the first one because your creature already has to be pretty good for it to do a thing, right? Otherwise, you're sort of fogging one creature and going down a card to do it, which isn't really worth it most of the time. There are times when it can be, if you're saving your bomb or whatever. But my point here is that I don't like it that much because it's really only good against removal. It's mediocre in combat. So, yeah, I don't like it very much. Definitely still on Foundry Inspector, and I'd take a lot of these cards before Loran's Escape. Next, we've got Thraxodemon, another 2-drop. These are important. This has been a little better than expected. Has those decent stats, can attack early, and then it has the ability to sack stuff to draw you cards, which obviously both the black-red and blue-black decks are interested in doing. You end up having the time to do it more often than I thought, usually only if the game is sort of stalled out, which doesn't happen all the time in the format. Oftentimes it's just 2 people curving out and attacking each other. But in the games where things do sort of slow down, it can help you get there. I still like Foundry Inspector and Argothian Sprite better, though. Next up, we've got Tomacool Scrapsmith. This whole cycle is all pretty solid. This one isn't one I like as much as any of the others because you don't always end up in a deck with quite enough artifacts to make it work. Foundry Inspector doesn't need that many artifacts to be worth it. The Scrapsmith kind of does. Like, you need to be drawing a card with it often enough with its mill effect, or, it's just not that good. So I don't love the idea of taking it early. All right, so now we move to Recruitment Officer, our first uncommon. This has been really good. It's sort of like a way better version of Thraxodemon in the sense that you play it early and it has good stats and it attacks well and you can use tricks to bust through blockers and all that fun aggro stuff. But then if the game does stall out, you have this great mana sink ability that's just going to allow you to outcard your opponent. It's close for me between Recruitment Officer and Inspector. I think in the end I go Inspector just because it keeps you even more open, and I think they're kind of comparable in power level anyway. Like, it's close, but I think I would still be in on the Inspector. Take Flight is next. This has been kind of disappointing. It's a fine card. It's not like unplayable or even close to it, but I kind of thought it would be one of Blue's best uncommons, and it hasn't really played out that way. And The reason for it is the same reason lots of things in this format have underperformed, and that's because it doesn't really add to the board. Yeah, you pay 4 to augment a creature, and it will start drawing you cards, but +1/+0 and flying for 4, like that rate is bad. And if your opponent's using their 4 mana to just play like a 4 mana 4/4, and you're spending your 4 mana to do this, your opponent's kind of going to feel like they came out ahead. Most games don't last long enough for Take Flight to really do its thing. There's also plenty of reach creatures in this set and plenty of flyers that make it so you're not always able to effectively attack anyway. So yeah, I mean, right now we're looking at Foundry Inspector and Recruitment Officer the most closely. Scrapwork Rager a little behind that. Take Flight's not really in the mix for a first pick for me. Calamity's Wake is our last uncommon. It's not good and limited. This is the kind of card that I didn't just talk about because, everyone knows it's terrible. I think, the people who have played it, the win percentage is in like the 30s or something. It's not the kind of card that I'm like, hey, people are playing this and they should stop. Nobody's playing it, and that's good. It's here for constructed, not for limited. Then our rare is one of the biggest bombs in the format, though. A card that, I thought was a bomb, but it's been even more of a bomb than I expected, playing the format. You're frequently, because aggro decks are so big in this format, the destroy everything with power 2 or less often just wipes your opponent's whole board, especially if you combine it with they sack their creature with the highest power effect. So, that can be absolutely devastating and one-sided if you're in like a grindier black-green deck, which won't have quite as many 2-drops in it and stuff like that, 2 power creatures in it. And then, another funny thing you can do if it's like an aggro mirror, like there's just so much stuff this card can do. If it's an aggro mirror, you can put 2 counters on like one of your 2 power creatures and blow up the rest of the board because the counters get put on first, so your creature won't die to the effect. Obviously, the other options are great too. If you have the time, just getting back 2 creatures and killing their best creature is often the most value-laden option, but there's lots of really good options with this card. Whichever ones you choose, your chances of winning the game go up by a lot when you cast this. So it's easily Gix's Command in the end. I think it goes Gix's Command, Foundry Inspector, Recruitment Officer, and then after that, like Scrapwork Rager or a Gothian Sprite probably. So Take Flight isn't even, remotely in the mix for me the way it's panned out in this format, which is sad. A format where Take Flight was good is probably a format I would have liked more. So that's our Crack-A-Pack. That does it for this edition of Nizzanotes. Next week, I think I might do the opposite, which I've done in sets in the past, which is 10 cards you should be playing more. And there certainly are some of those. I still see some cards being underrated and stuff, and I want to try to make them properly rated so that people can improve their win percentage. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly.